From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer during a bye week for the Baltimore Ravens as they get to kick their feet up and relax and watch Wild Card Weekend and await their opponent on this podcast. We will discuss the 4 potential AFC opponents for the Ravens in the divisional round and rank them in order of how frightened we are by them coming into M&T Bank Stadium. We're also going to, unfortunately, have to relitigate that 2019 devastating playoff loss to the Tennessee Titans as we discuss how this Ravens team can learn from that loss and also avoid some of the pitfalls that they experienced during that loss. But first, Jonas, let's get a quick word from our sponsor. And while we do that, maybe you can give us a like, a thumbs up, write a review. If you write us a positive review on the Banner Ravens podcast, by the way, we will read it out on our next podcast. So maybe write us something nice.
If you have an appetite for saving money, then you should get the Rofo Rewards app from Royal Farms. Use the Rofo Rewards app to place mobile orders for pickup or delivery and earn royalty points to redeem for free stuff. And right now, new Rofo Rewards members will get a free any size coffee for signing up. You can download the Rofo Rewards app at the Apple App Store or Google Play today. You'll find it's a very appealing app to have. Real fresh, real fast. Royal Farms.
All right, Jonas, some interesting games coming up this weekend, especially in the AFC, where we have a fascinating 3 games. The AFC games are being played earlier than the NFC games. The NFC games reach all the way into Monday, so that's good. That means that the Ravens will at least have an idea of who their opponent is going to be by the time they start practices next week. 3 games. Browns at Texans on Saturday at 4:30. You got Dolphins at Chiefs on Saturday at 8 p.m., and then you've got Steelers at Bills Sunday at 1 o'clock. I think the Dolphins game is going to be only on Peacock. Is that correct?
Yeah, one of those is only on Peacock.
Are you going to have to get Peacock to watch this game?
I used to have Peacock to watch Liverpool, and then my free trial or whatever ran out. So, yeah.
Better than having Peacock just to watch the Office or something like that.
Yeah, not a huge fan of The Office. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't know about it.
Not Kirk Cousins? Oh, wow. Kirk Cousins loves The Office, apparently.
Yeah, well, that makes sense.
Fits, yeah. All right, so 3 interesting games. Let's talk about the 4 potential opponents. So essentially, if you didn't know, the AFC and the NFC, you reseed the playoffs after week 1. So essentially, the Ravens, as the 1 seed, will get the worst remaining seed after the wild card weekend. And Gianna Hahn wrote a great piece for the BaltimoreBanner.com where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months, where she ranked each potential opponent on a scale of concerned Harbaughs. We don't have a similar scale, but we are going to rank these 4 opponents. So essentially, the Ravens cannot, in the divisional round, face the Bills. They cannot face the Chiefs, but they could face the Texans, who are the 4 seed, the Browns, who are the 5, Dolphins, who are the 6, and the Steelers, who are the 7. Let's go in order of who you would like the Ravens to face the most. Which matchup you think favors the Ravens the most in a divisional round? Jonas, has to be the Pittsburgh Steelers to start off this list.
I guess it depends on how many Dolphins get frostbite this weekend.
Yeah,
because at this rate, Miami's not going to have a defense to play with. It's absurd. But on paper, as it stands right now, without any frostbite considerations, which again I feel is unfair. Yeah, it's Pittsburgh because they will have, I think, clearly the worst quarterback in the AFC field, and this is a Steelers defense that we expect to be without TJ Watt.
Yeah,
that it's hard to be that scared of this group that relies so much on its pass rush. Lamar, I wrote this in the preview for the Steelers game. Lamar, over his 4 starts, and I can't believe it's only 4 starts, I think, against the Steelers over his career, has been sacked on 1 of every basically like 9-10 dropbacks, which is an astounding rate.
Yeah.
He's been pressured, I think, on 40% of his dropbacks. And a lot of that is Watt, just beating up on guys who, maybe were
Morgan
underqualified
Moses
for the job. Well, yeah. Alejandro Villanueva too.
Right.
There have been a lot of games without Ronnie Stanley, or at least Ronnie Stanley at full health. So you take away this potential defensive MVP candidate. It's a secondary that has been without Minkah Fitzpatrick. We don't know, don't know what his status is for this weekend. He's the leader of that group. Joey Porter Jr., clearly a talented young cornerback, but there is not the great core of this Steelers defense that you can count on to win a game that you could in years past. Not to say that it's not a good defense. It clearly is. It was carrying that group for a while they were going with Kenny Pickett, but still Mason Rudolph, we saw he couldn't connect with, George Pickens in a game where he felt like he had to connect with George Pickens in week 18. Pittsburgh ground game, physical, strong, but still, I think the Ravens have the horses to withstand that. So all that team beaten up coming into Baltimore against the Ravens team that you would think would be really, really motivated to finally end this skid against Pittsburgh. I think it has to be Pittsburgh at the end.
So often in playoff games, it just comes down to who has the better quarterback and who can win in crunch time. And you just can never feel good about Mason Rudolph being the better quarterback in any matchup in the playoffs, and especially against the Ravens. He only has 2 starts against the Ravens, and those numbers were boosted by that start a week ago, week 18, in which he was playing against a Roquan Smith-less defense. He was just beating up on the Ravens backups, obviously. So you really have to throw out that and consider the fact that he has been a backup the vast majority of his career. What it would take to happen, though, what it would take for the Ravens to face the Steelers, essentially the Ravens are going to get the Steelers if the Steelers win, because they would be the worst remaining seed. But they would have to go into Buffalo and beat the Bills, which would be possible if Josh Allen were to have one of his disaster class games, one of those games where he just throws multiple picks. We saw it in week 18 against the Dolphins, how he just kind of has this tendency to, once he gets out of structure, he can kind of lob the ball up and just pray that somebody is down there, that Stephon Diggs will be able to make a play on the ball. It's possible, not likely, but I think there is a scenario in which the Steelers can pull off the upset. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Gabe Davis might not be available for that one. He's obviously not as important to Buffalo as someone like Stephon Diggs or even perhaps Dalton Kincaid, but I think you heard on the broadcast that he's played the most snaps of any Bills receiver on that roster. He's obviously important to what they want to do run game wise. He's a vertical threat that opens up over the middle. So none of these teams are healthy. That this is going to be a theme for the rest of this season, for the rest of this podcast. But if there's any coach, I guess, in the NFL that you can trust to drag an opponent in the playoffs down to that muddy level and just slop it up, it's got to be Mike Tomlin, right?
Slop it up.
Slop
exactly.
it up.
So next up, we have the Steelers as the most likely, or not the most likely, but the best matchup for the Ravens. You mentioned the Dolphins getting frostbite in Kansas City. Even without the frostbite, Jonas, I think the Dolphins are the next best option for the Ravens, just because of what we saw from the Dolphins when they came into M&T Bank Stadium several weeks ago, and what we've seen from the Dolphins in terms of them disappearing in big games. Really, the only great win they have on their resume so far this season is against the Cowboys, and that was a close, grinded out game in Miami, and they got the win on a field goal in the last couple seconds. But they have not quite been able to beat the allegations about them disappearing in big games. And Tua Tagovailoa, as great of a season as he has had statistically, has not quite been able to beat the allegations of him throwing picks that he doesn't need to, throwing to spots, as Roquan Smith says. We saw him struggle against the Ravens defense a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, this is just an injury-ravaged defense, injury-ravaged team, point blank. It looks like Jalen Waddle is back at wide receiver, limited participant in Wednesday's practice, which is a good thing. But
he wasn't available in that loss.
Week 17 game, yeah. But Deshaun Elliott, one of their starting safeties, did not practice on Wednesday. Javon Holland, another guy with the knees plural injury, also not practicing. Xavier Howard, who of course his absence in that first Ravens game, that Week 17 game against the Ravens, was so crucial, still not practicing. And you feel like a game against, the Chiefs right now, with how physical that offensive line is, especially, how much worse would they come out of that game?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, I think the ceiling of this Dolphins offense is probably higher than anyone's, but besides maybe the Ravens, maybe even including the Ravens, just because of the skill position talent they have, because of the run schemes that they have, because Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane are both just special game breakers. But you need an offensive line to block for them. That's been an issue. And just the defense right now with so many guys being lost for the playoffs. I mean, this defense couldn't keep the Ravens under 50 a couple weeks ago, and now you don't have Van Ginkel. Now you don't have Bradley Chubb for the entire game.
True.
Jerome Baker, it sounds like it is out. They lost another rotational linebacker. Just what chances do they have? I mean, we said that a million times already this year. Like, then the Ravens go out and lay a stinker against the Cardinals or something like that. But you feel like this is a different Ravens iteration of that offense.
Right. But you also feel, by the same token, like, what chance does this Dolphins team have against the Chiefs in a frigid, cold environment at Arrowhead Stadium? That's what it would take for the Ravens to face the Dolphins: a Steelers loss and a Dolphins win over the Chiefs. And as frustrating as that Chiefs offense has been because of their lack of playmakers, I just don't feel good about the Dolphins' ability to go in and beat up on them just because of the sheer number of injuries. So I don't think it's particularly likely that this scenario plays out. But given the 56-19 beating that the Ravens put on the Dolphins, if it were to come to pass, I think you have to feel good about it. Next up, so we've gone through now the Steelers and the Dolphins. This one is interesting. It's the 4-5 matchup. So the Ravens could get one of these two teams. And I put the 4 above the 5 here in terms of a better matchup for the Ravens, the Texans. Because you look back to week 1 when the Ravens dominated the Texans 25-9. Now, that was a long time ago. That was months ago. The Texans are a better team. We know a lot more about the Texans and the Ravens now than we did back then. But the Ravens absolutely dominated that game. And that was one of the worst games of C.J. Stroud's young career, his second worst game of his rookie season, according to quarterback rating. My concern would be the Texans' defense in particular, the run defense. The pass defense actually held Lamar Jackson to his 4th worst game of the season, according to quarterback rating. But they're just kind of middle of the pack in terms of offensive rating and defensive rating, and that's why I'm not particularly frightened of them.
And they're also a little bit banged up defensively right now. Will Anderson, who was fantastic in that first game, made life hell for Kevin Zeitler on a couple snaps, 6 pressures in that game. I don't think he's practiced yet this week. He's been dealing with an ankle injury, I believe. Jonathan Grenard, another pass rusher up front, I believe also dealing with an injury. And then this Texans offense, without Tank Dell, he was not that impactful in week 1, but he was so useful for them as a slot guy. Obviously, C.J. Stroud is capable of making so many big-time plays, so many big-time throws. But he can put the ball in harm's way. And we've seen this Ravens defense be advantageous, be opportunistic in making quarterbacks pay for those kind of mistakes, those kinds of transgressions. So I think whether, I would imagine the Ravens would be comfortably like at least touchdown favorites. If it's Houston coming to town, it would be really interesting to see what D'Amico Ryans would try to devise schematically to try to slow this offense, because he did an okay job, in week 1. But again, that was the first game of Lamar and Todd Monken together, first game of Lamar, Zay, Odell, so many guys who'd gotten so few reps in together. You feel like that chemistry is there that maybe wasn't there, and the Ravens still put up over 20 points in that game. So the Ravens, I think, would have by far the best unit in all 3 phases of that game. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it isn't. But I think just based on what Houston is dealing with injury-wise, and also the fact that so many of the guys on this team are young and maybe not ready for the divisional round primetime lights, it would definitely be tough sledding for them.
Yeah, not to say that they don't have a bright future, but if you could draw in a vacuum a rookie head coach and a rookie quarterback as a playoff matchup, you would pick that. Next up is a veteran quarterback, and now getting up to be a veteran head coach. Just feels like destiny that the Cleveland Browns would come into M&T Bank Stadium during the playoffs and Joe Flacco would return home. What this matchup would take, it would take to get this matchup would be the Steelers losing, it would be the Dolphins losing, and it would be the Browns beating the Texans. Jonas, how would you feel about a matchup between Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson? We saw it week 1 of the 2022 season, but that was when Flacco was with the hapless Jets and he was starting in place of Zach Wilson. Now we could see Joe Flacco as a deity in the city of Cleveland. He is beloved.
And now possibly coming to Baltimore after his dad said that the Browns crowds are better than the Ravens crowds.
Yeah. Nothing like Cleveland, I think is what he said.
Story of Joe Flacco's biography. Yeah, I mean, as far as like narrative, I guess it would be tough for me to have to endure a week of rest versus rust debates to segue into Joe Flacco versus Lamar
Yeah.
narrative.
But think
not
about the
really that
clicks on the BaltimoreBanner.com. Think about the views, the page views.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to rehash, and I'm sure if and when it comes to pass, we will rehash it. We talked about that 2018 game and the peaceful transition of power that Joe Flacco allowed for Lamar and this Ravens team. That was very gracious of him. And, Lamar was very, very complimentary toward Lamar when our buddy Kyle Goon asked him about it yesterday. And, Lamar sounded very happy that Joe's been able to find a way. But big picture, I think that game would be more about the Browns defense against the Ravens offense than Lamar against Joe. I mean, as Lamar will tell you, he resists all comparison questions at the quarterback position because he's not playing other quarterbacks,
Right.
even though it is impossible to see these games as anything but quarterback versus quarterback in terms of that narrative. But this Browns defense, had basically the week off, week 18, got Grant Delpit back at safety. Was having a Pro Bowl level year until he got hurt. Lamar has not been particularly consistent against the blitz, against man-to-man coverage. You would expect to see a lot of that, a lot of man, a lot of blitz against the Browns. And it could be a situation where Lamar just goes off because he has all the answers, or it could be a situation where it is just 3 and out after 3 and out because this offense cannot get on track. This offense will not have Keaton Mitchell, which it did in that first meeting. We don't know what the state of the offensive line could be. Good sign that Kevin Zeitler is back at practice. But yeah, I mean, for all the talk about the quarterback matchup, I think it really is going to be, can the Ravens stop the play action passing game of Joe Flacco, and can the Browns blitz Lamar into submission?
And we saw Cleveland come into Baltimore back in week 10 and beat the Ravens in a fourth quarter comeback, 33-31. It would be fascinating to see Cleveland play Baltimore 3 times this year with 3 different quarterbacks. Remember, Dorian Thompson-Robinson started the first game. The Ravens beat up on them 28-3. Then that loss at home for the Ravens, they were facing Deshaun Watson, and then they could be facing Joe Flacco. So that matchup is a possibility, not just in the divisional round, but also could happen in the AFC Championship game as well. If some upsets happen in the first round and, the Ravens don't end up facing the Browns, but the Browns win and the Browns keep winning, they could come in for the AFC Championship game as well. This narrative is not going to die, Jonas, so long as the Browns keep winning.
I know. And it would be an especially big gut punch because for all the Ravens have lost to injuries this year, and it is considerable, the Browns have something like $70 million on injured reserve right now. I mean, obviously Deshaun Watson is not an upgrade on Joe Flacco. I think we can comfortably say that, at least within the framework of this Kevin Stefanski offense. But
which is crazy to say.
I know,
but it's true.
Considering, they lost Chubb, they lost so many guys who are really impactful, and we don't even know who might get hurt this weekend. Amari Cooper was dealing with that heel injury in week 17. Elijah Moore missed the week 18 game with a concussion. That they are banged up, and they probably will get more banged up this weekend. But that's no excuse. The Ravens are going to be favorites against basically every team in this AFC, even if it's the Chiefs coming to town, even if it's Patrick Mahomes, finally looking like himself again. The Ravens are going to be the favorite in every game throughout this playoff run. It's just a matter of how long the playoff run is going to go.
Yeah, and we will find out who their opponent will be by the end of Sunday night. And we will, of course, have a complete breakdown of the opponent come Monday. I think Monday we're going to go live and discuss who the Ravens will play, and we'll preview that matchup. All right, Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer here on the Banner Ravens podcast. I teased it at the beginning, and it's unfortunate that we have to go back and do this. It feels like, dragging up old stuff in therapy. But we have to talk about the 2019 loss to the Tennessee Titans in the playoffs. And Jonas, we were talking before this show about how the Ravens did not have to wait very long to get revenge on the Titans in the playoffs. They beat them in the postseason a year later, but it just feels like that win never happened. It feels like in Ravens fans' heads, the loss to the Titans in 2019 takes up so much more space than the win in 2020. They are just so much more scarred by the loss. than they are vindicated by the win, because it was such a great team in 2019. It was such a favorable matchup for the Ravens in the divisional round, and they let it slip. 10-point favorites, and they let it all slip.
I wanted to go back and see how well my memory had held up of that game. And I was curious about just how badly things had gone in retrospect, now that we have all this access to data and to stats and to true media and stuff like that. And it was interesting to go back and watch it. And I think in my rewatching of it, you realize it was as bad as you can remember it, but that should give you some confidence about 2023, because you can feel bad about 2019, but also recognize that that took an incredible series of unfortunate events, unlikely to be repeated in 2023, especially if it's against a lesser non-Cleveland Browns team that's coming to Baltimore next weekend. I mean, the amount of things that had to go wrong for the Ravens, and obviously it was not a close game by the end of the fourth quarter there, but it was just one thing after another, one like hallmark of Ravens 2019 football that went wrong, that was eroded, and just in wholly unexpected ways, from injuries to the running game to Lamar making interceptions to the defense getting beat deep. I mean, it was just one thing after another.
Let's go through all the things that went wrong, shall we, Jonas? We'll try not to spend too much time on each individual mistake, but let's start with the Mark Andrews drop that led to an interception right out of his hands and into the hands of a Tennessee defender. That really set the tone for how this afternoon, this late evening was going to go for the Ravens.
Yeah, I mean, that was, it's hard to remember now, but that was a turning point in a game that was seemingly headed toward the Ravens' way. You know, they got a stop on the Titans' first possession of the game. Titans didn't go 3 and out, but they got just one first down, and they had to punt. Ravens take over the ball. They're moving the ball they're over midfield, averaging over 7 yards per play over the first 6 plays of that drive. And then on play number 7, you know, Lamar drops back. It's a crossing pattern. Mark Andrews has got good separation from Logan Ryan. You know, completion probability, you look at right now on next gen stats, of 69.3%. So not exactly a tight window throw, but that ball kind of sails on Lamar just a little bit. Maybe it gets to Mark a little bit quicker than he expected. Bounces off that right hand and it falls right to Kevin Byard. Just right place, right time. He brings it back to midfield. Lamar gets a little bit over aggressive in tackling him. That's another 15-yard penalty. And that drive finishes with a Titans touchdown, and we are off and running. I mean, Mark had been dealing with an ankle injury in that game. Coming into that game, he was limited in practice. I remember talking, I think I've said this on the podcast, but, you know, talking to his brother for a story a couple years later about just what kind of shape Mark was in that game. And maybe explains the, you know, lack of explosiveness on the jump attempt to actually reach the ball. But when Mark left Baltimore and headed back home with his brother, he could barely walk in the airport. He was just in a world of pain. A lot of Ravens were dealing with bumps and bruises. You know, Mark Ingram was hurting that. Pat Ricard was hurting that. Nick Boyle was hurting that. And that play, I guess, you know, was representative of so much of that Ravens failure that day and what they didn't have. Because if you don't have Mark Andrews making good catches, if you don't have Pat Ricard and Nick Boyle blowing people off the ball, you know, they played like a handful of snaps together for a group that was so used to those two blockers being the wedge of that offense, playing well over a dozen snaps. That was the fewest snaps they played in a game together, Pat Ricard and Nick Boyle. And you know, if you take away a team's strength and you make them fight left-handed, then things kind of tend to go wrong. And the passing offense, or just the offense in general, never really seemed to hit its stride in the way that it had before that interception.
And turnover luck is a thing. Over the course of a season, it usually balances itself out. And, you know, a 17, 18 game sample size, you have, you know, everything kind of evens itself out, and the good teams will still end up winning despite the turnover luck. Bad teams will still end up losing. But when you get it down to one single game, that's where it can be absolutely killer. And the Ravens just had too many crucial turnovers that were perhaps unlucky. You know, it may be a little bit of a high throw by Lamar Jackson, like you said, but in a different world, that ball bounces off his hand and Kevin Byard is nowhere near in position, or that ball does, maybe Mark Andrews doesn't get his hands on the ball and it just falls incomplete.
Yeah.
And the Ravens go down and score a touchdown or kick a field goal on that drive.
I mean, you would know this, Paul, as a Syracuse fan. But,
Where's
sometimes
this going?
you can have a really good 3-point shooting team, and then you go against Syracuse in the round of 32, and
There you go.
There's that zone. I can't wait to rain threes, and you end up going 2 for 18 and losing to Syracuse as the 2 seed.
There you go. And Indiana falls with Victor Oladipo, and they're Syracuse in the Final Four like they always do, Jonas.
Yeah.
That was very unlucky by the Ravens. And then you talk about fourth down execution, which is a combination of failure of execution and little bit of lack of luck, because the Ravens were so good on those 4th and shorts during the regular season. 6 for 6 on 4th and 1 on offense during the regular season. 2 for 2 with the special teams on 4th and 1. Jonas, we talked about on this podcast before how this year's 2023 Ravens have not gone for nearly as many 4th downs. That Ravens team in 2019 was the poster child for analytics leading the way, dual threat quarterback using as many weapons as he can, either running, either throwing, and picking up the first down, going for it. And it bit them in this game. They were aggressive, as they should have been, but you also wonder if, because they were so favored, because the Titans were such underdogs, if the Ravens, just got unlucky going for it and being as aggressive as they had been throughout the regular season. But it got them there. So you have to stick with what gets you there.
Yeah. And it is wild that basically neither of these runs that the Ravens tried, they went 0 for 4, but 2 of those were, I believe, in the 4th quarter. And the 2 ones that stick out were the sneaks from Lamar that really didn't go anywhere. And it is kind of baffling to look at it in retrospect, because the first one, Titans are up 7-0. It's the first play of the 2nd quarter. So you would think that with that break for TV, you would get everything nailed down. Lamar's in the shotgun. You got Bradley Bozeman kind of wrapping around, and Lamar doesn't follow him. He sees a hole up the middle that he tries to hit and doesn't go anywhere. And, obviously you trust your quarterback, your soon to be MVP quarterback, implicitly. But if he follows Bozeman wrapping around that right side of the line, there's at least a better chance of him finding a little bit of daylight. But he doesn't. It's a turnover. And before long, it is 14-0. That was another short field that the Ravens gifted to Tennessee, and they made them pay for it.
Yeah, and then you talk about the statistics that Ryan Tannehill put up in this game. Bizarre, because he did not have a very good statistical game. 7 for 14 for 88 yards, 2 touchdowns, and one of those, both of those were excellent downfield throws. But Jonas, to be able to complete just 50% of your passes and throw for fewer than 100 yards in a game, especially in a playoff game, you would not think would get you the win, but it did.
No, and it's incredible. I think just a totally bizarre statistic that neither of us expected. Starting quarterbacks in a playoff game with basically Ryan Tannehill's stat line. So fewer than 100 passing yards, 50% or worse accuracy, and at least 14 pass attempts. Just so that we're accounting for guys who might have gotten hurt or weren't confined to just a couple throws here and there. Somehow they're 5-6 since 2000. The Ravens, to their credit, were 2-0 against those just like awful yuck it up quarterbacks before this game, but they couldn't stop Ryan Tannehill on the passes that they needed to. It was totally bizarre. I mean, like the first one is that touchdown pass to Jonnu Smith, 3rd and goal from the 12-yard line. Teams were making 12.5% of their 3rd or 4th and goal from 12s all year, and it was well covered by Brandon Carr. It was just
perfectly thrown.
His best beat Brandon Carr's best. It was a one-handed grab. Somehow he's able to get both feet in bounds. 25.4% catch probability on that one. And then you look at the second one, a little bit more blame for the cornerback on this one, which in this case is Marlon Humphrey. It's coming one play after that 4th down stop that we didn't mention, or I think that we did mention, so that this puts Tennessee up 14-0. It's just a simple downfield route. Marlon Humphrey gets turned around on the vertical stem. It's a perfect throw, almost 50 yards through the air, and boom, the Titans lead 14-0. And that was just a shocking moment that really took all the air out of the stadium at M&T, because how often had the Ravens gotten down even by double digits to that point in the season, and for them to be down 14-0 in the second quarter, the offense looking totally confused and feckless, it was just devastating.
And one of the narratives that came out of that game was the Ravens' inability to come back in a game that they were trailing in, because we just had not seen that a whole lot during the regular season, and they were such a run-heavy team. Did they have enough weapons? Did they have enough offensive firepower to overcome a multiple score deficit? But on the other side, Tennessee was a team that was very much built to play with the lead. And they did that very effectively, thanks to Derrick Henry, who was running the ball 30 times for 195 yards, 97 rushing yards over expectation, Jonas. I mean, that was the peak of Derrick Henry. And it was not a Ravens defense that was particularly primed to stop a runner like Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot like this year's team, where the strength of that defense was the pass defense. The run defense was good. It was not great. And you saw maybe the difference between those two and how they can kind of cost you on that big 66-yard run from Henry. Middle of the third quarter, it's I believe a 3rd and 1. Matthew Judon has Derrick Henry in his grasp behind the line of scrimmage. There's a chance to send Tennessee punting, and he misses it. And Derrick Henry makes Brandon Carr miss, and he is off and running. It took Marcus Peters, of all people, to chase him down and bring him down. And again, that leads to another Titans touchdown. I don't know if it was that drive, but Derrick Henry not only punishing the Ravens with his legs, but with his arm as well. There was the little pop pass to Corey Davis to give them that 21-6 lead. I believe it was the score that finished off that drive. So, Derrick Henry obviously didn't do a whole lot in that 2020 rematch in Tennessee, but as you said, the scars from that 2019 game are still there.
And Lamar Jackson threw 59 passes in this game, completed 31, threw for 365 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 picks, took 4 sacks. You've written about on the BaltimoreBanner.com how much more of an evolved passer Lamar Jackson is now than he was in 2019. Especially in 2019, it was not a winning formula to have Lamar Jackson drop back as many times as he did. And I know that's because they were largely playing from behind, but he made some critical mistakes in this game. And maybe that's what fueled him to become the passer that he is today. And that's led to him learning some hard lessons, but he struggled certainly through the air in that game.
Yeah. I mean, there were a couple incredible throws. If you remember the one-handed grab by Hollywood Brown near the end of the first half, that put the Ravens in position to strike. But even that one was kind of undercut by what happened next. And I think the Ravens had like 11 seconds on the play clock. They had time for at least probably 2 quick passes, and Lamar drops back right after that and kind of goes into scramble mode. It's a good thing he didn't get sacked, because I don't think the Ravens had any timeouts, and that would have been totally huge for them not to get any points after that incredible catch and completion to Hollywood. But basically runs himself out of time, and the Ravens have to send on the punt team. There was the interception near the end of the third quarter where he's just kind of staring Kenny Vaccaro down as Miles Boykin runs the speed out. He throws it anyway. It's picked. Another promising drive ends without any points. But if you want to talk about the differences between this 2019 or this 2023 team and that 2019 team, it's just like, it's not only the competence of Lamar, but it's also just the competence of the weapons. Seth Roberts, huge drop pass. Actually watching it back again, a little bit more sympathetic to him, because the cornerback or safety who's running with him on that second quarter pass, where it looked like he had a chance for a huge catch and run touchdown, had him pretty well covered, and he reaches out to the ball, and maybe that's enough to distract Seth Robert, but still the ball hits him in the hands. He drops it. If he even bobbles it to himself and makes that catch, he is off and running, scores like a 75-yard touchdown. But it doesn't happen. And that was probably the last time that we heard from Seth Roberts.
Yeah. One more factor in this game that led to the loss by the Ravens was the Dean Pease factor, who had announced his retirement a year earlier, was, of course, the Ravens defensive coordinator. Then goes and joins Mike Vrabel's staff in Tennessee Titans, and he was out for vengeance in this game, Jonas.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the big benefit of Lamar being this far removed from that game is that he's basically seen everything. There is nothing that he can see that will surprise him. There's nothing you hope that Todd Monken can see from the years of film that he has on this Ravens offense that might surprise him. But what Dean Pease did that day was pretty effective. It was playing with this tight front, TITE, which basically said that we're going to gum up the works inside. We're going to play with a kind of reduced alignment of defensive linemen so that you can be less effective with how you pull the ball. Your read option stuff is going to be less effective. We're going to be willing to concede some pass rush juice to get more integrity in the run defense. And it really worked. The Ravens had played 16 games before that one. Only once were 20% of their design runs stopped for no gain or negative yardage. That was the Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, Mike Tomlin just yucking it up. The Ravens still found a way to win that one. The Titans stopped close to a quarter of the Ravens' design runs for 0 yards or negative. And even when, Lamar did drop back, there were just situations where, Dean Pease just like walking around with a horseshoe in his, up his butt. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like if you remember the Lamar strip sack fumble, Mark Ingram is sent out in motion. He's in the slot. He's next to Jarrell Casey, who's matched up against Ronnie Stanley. You do not need to chip block a 300-pound defensive end, especially against that version of Ronnie Stanley. But Mark Ingram chip blocks him. He basically it's like the mushroom effect in Mario Kart where the guy just speeds up quickly. He basically slingshot him past Ronnie Stanley to Lamar, pressures Lamar. Lamar escapes the pressure, but doesn't get rid of the ball in time. And Casey kind of doubles back, gets the strip sack. Titans score, and at that point, I think it's 28-6. So there were just so many things that, yes, Dean Pease was responsible for, but just the bad luck factor of all this and how things were breaking in all the worst ways possible.
So I think big picture, when you look at this loss that is now 4 years old, and this is a totally different Ravens team than the one that we saw back in 2019. It's a totally different group of weapons, especially with Mark Andrews out. I mean, Lamar's going to be throwing to all new weapons. He is a much better passer than he ever was, than he was that year. Obviously, new coordinators on both sides. Big picture, though, I think this speaks to how much it takes for an underdog, a heavy underdog like that, to win, how many things need to break right. But by the same token, it also speaks to just the variability of a one-game, 60-minute sample size.
Yep.
And how any team, when you say any given Sunday, a lot of it is just luck. It is just things breaking your way. And I know it didn't end up being a close game by the end, but it was also buoyed by the fact that the Ravens were down so much for so much of the game that they had to then force things at the end of the game. And it might have been a closer game had they been more patient and had they been more methodical. It just speaks to how tenuous a better team can be, and how tenuous a game can be when it gets into such a small sample size. And that is what concerns Ravens fans, but it should concern every fan in a playoff game because wild, crazy stuff happens in playoff games.
Yeah. Injuries happen, bad bounces happen, bad calls happen. It is what I mean, that's why we love sports. That's why I love the NCAA tournament, because you can see Virginia lose to a UMBC,
Or Syracuse.
Yeah. Which they did, right?
They did, yeah.
The Elite Eight a couple years later.
Yeah, I was a junior.
Yeah.
I don't remember it at all.
But to the point about this Ravens team being #built different, I think I saw on Twitter yesterday, conveniently enough, like the Ravens offense has not spent a lot of time trailing. They are comfortably among the all-time great teams in terms of the amount of time that they've actually led games for a season. But they were, according to this PFF tweet, the most efficient offense when trailing. And maybe that was a similar circumstance in 2019, and we just didn't pay attention to it because we weren't wondering what misfortune might befall the Ravens. But we know that this Ravens team, based on what we saw in the 49ers game, based on what we saw in the Rams game, especially, can do a lot of different things. Still a great coaching staff, but you feel like this coaching staff and this team have more ways to win than that 2019 team did. And maybe that is just a overly generous kind of whitewashing of history and being a prisoner of the moment. But I just think, even though this rushing offense isn't what it was in 2019, the passing game is the coin of the realm, so to speak. And the Ravens have that in spades in ways they didn't 4 years ago.
Yeah. One thing we want to discuss real quick before we get out of here, Jonas, and that would be the Ravens coaches, some of their assistant coaches getting interviews for head coaching jobs. Now, we expected Mike Macdonald, the defensive coordinator, would get some looks for head coaching jobs. And he has, according to reports, he is interviewing with the Panthers. He's interviewing with the Commanders and the Titans. We've also seen Todd Monken get some looks. Panthers, Chargers are interviewing Todd Monken for their head coaching job. And then Anthony Weaver getting interviewed by the Commanders. And I believe today the Falcons came out and said that they are going to, it was reported that they're going to interview Anthony Weaver. We could be looking at a totally different Ravens coaching staff next year, which stinks in terms of continuity. And it stinks in terms of, if Lamar loses his offensive coordinator under a career year and he goes and takes a head coaching job, that would stink. And it would also stink for this defense to be losing their leader and their kind of evil genius pulling the switches.
Yeah, it's become a fascinating coaching search through the prism of what happens to the Ravens, because when we were talking about what job Mike Macdonald might take this offseason, we were not expecting Bill Belichick to be in that list of coaching candidates. We were not expecting Mike Vrabel to be in that list of coaching candidates. Yeah, Pete Carroll maybe. So there is, the Jim Harbaugh factor is still alive and well. We don't know, how highly the NFL thinks of him or how desperately he wants to leave Michigan now that he's actually won a title there. So does that give Mike Macdonald and Ben Johnson and guys of that caliber as coaching candidates a little bit more pause? If you are being offered the Carolina job, are you willing to say, you know what, I'm good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, thanks, David Tepper.
We'll maybe meet again next year when Bryce Young looks a little bit more competent. So I would say that this is all breaking somewhat favorably for the Ravens, because you would much rather be first in line than fourth in line or fifth in line. And it's going to be interesting next couple of weeks, because all these are virtual interviews. We are, I would imagine that Mike Macdonald interviews very well in person. He's just a very polished guy, but he's not going to be able to do that until after the divisional round. And at that point, the Ravens might still be going. They might not be, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch. Something to keep on the back burner as the Ravens prepare for their divisional round matchup against an unknown opponent. Like I said, we will have an episode for you Monday as we break down who that opponent is. Could be one of 4 teams. At Jonas_Shaffer is his Twitter handle. I am at Paul Mancano. Please like, review, rate, subscribe at All Banner Sports. Give us a follow there as well. Thanks so much for tuning into the Banner Ravens podcast. For Jonas Shaffer, I'm Paul Mancano. We'll catch you next time.